user risk policy, sign-in risk policy? Guys, please open. Please unmute yourself. I like this class to be interactive.
Yes.
Hmm. All right. So in this specific feature, we talked like how can we configure this policy, then what kind of reports we can have, what kind of logs we can see here. If someone's like login or account is at stake, or someone is trying to get unauthorized access to their account. However, this specific setting was not visible in the last class. So if you see here, whenever Azure detects that someone is trying to gain unauthorized access for any user account, we can set up this alert policy here. We can set up the email addresses who can receive those alerts, either about the risky users or the sign-in risk policy. So as you can see here, it says that users in the global admin, security admin, or security reader rules are automatically added to this list. That means they will always receive an email if any of these activity happens. However, if you want to add someone like a manual email address, so for example, you see these two are global admins, so these were added by default. But this email address, ajay@yourservice.online, I added it manually. So you can configure this. And it says alert on user risk level at or above. So as we mentioned earlier, low, medium, or high. As soon as like for high means like when Azure is 100% sure that this activity is some like 100% suspicious, then only then it will send the email address. You can set it as low, means even if it's slightly suspected or suspicious, even in that scenario it will send the email. Or if you want it to be medium risk level, you can set it as that as well. So high means there are less number of alerts, but those would be like most likely accurate alerts. Low means like there would be more number of alerts, however it will like it may be false positive alerts as well, but it will ensure that no such risky sign in or such attempts is going unnoticed. So it depends upon how your organization wants to set these alerts. Then you can have weekly digests when an like a accumulated or like aggregated report is sent to the admins per week. You can define this as well. So this was the option which was not visible, so this is something which you can configure. Now coming to our today's topic, that is secret or the service principle. So guys, you remember in the previous class we mentioned the RBAC roles. Like to any resource we can provide access to any user and some level of permissions that that user can do what for that specific Azure resource. So if I open any of the resource, for example, we have virtual machines on the screen right now. So let's take this VM. And if we have to assign any user any permission on this virtual machine, this specific Azure resource. So Azure resource could be anything. It could be a database, it could be a container, it could be a logical app, could be anything in the Azure resources. If we come here, access control IAM, if we go to add role assignment, and take any permissions from here, any job function role, and if we go to members here, last class we discussed that how can we assign permission to user or group. However, we did not discuss about service principle or manage identity. So I know I think Pramod works on service principles. Pramod?
Yeah.
Okay, so if I ask you, give me just a very like a one-liner statement. What is service principle? How would you explain that?
Service principle we used to use for the integration of third-party applications for the doing the SSO or yeah, that's what I'm doing it actually in current organization.
So if I ask you, like, what is service principle and why it is used?
It is used to provide the authentication by our organization actually
To whom?
to the users which we are assigning the permission.
But we can use the user accounts itself. Why would
No.
we need
See,
service principal then?
service principal is like it's like a service account. In the on-premises, you have service accounts, right? It's equal to like in the cloud. Service principal is specific to certain applications. Uh,
Absolutely right. Applications was the word which I was trying to get from your mouth. So, sorry, guys. So here, as you can see, that any like permission which we want to give to any user group of users, we can directly choose users, select members, and we can select the users from here. But think of a scenario wherein we have deployed an external application, maybe on a third party service application, or maybe on our on premises environment. We have deployed an application and we want to give access of some Azure resources. Let's say that application is something which wants to get access to a data stored in a database. Now database is a like a resource in the Azure. We want to give that application access to the data of that database. How would we give that? Do we have any user identity created for the application? No, we do not have. We can create user accounts. However, we do not have anything which would represent that application to gain access to that resource. How would we want the application to appear here as we can see all the users appearing here? How can we have that? In that case, the answer is a service principal. So when we create a service principal, we get username and password similarly as what we get for the users whenever we create users. So if I go back and if I go to service principal option, just give me a moment, guys. So if I want an identity here, which would represent that application to access the resource, what I will do is I will go to the Entra main home page. Then I will go to register app registrations. Here, I will click on new registration. Eddie, have you ever performed this activity?
Yeah. Yes, I have done that.
Okay.
No, not yet.
This question first was for Eddie. Eddie.
No, yeah, not yet. Not yet.
Okay.
I haven't gotten there yet.
Okay. Eddie, is this your full name or is it like just a short form?
Just a short form.
And what is your complete name?
Name is Adebola.
Adibola. Okay.
Yeah.
Please don't forget to provide your name and your email address over the WhatsApp group. I will be
Okay.
sending the links to whatever we read in every class. I send an email or that would be helpful for you. All right.
Okay.
So register an application. Here we will give a name. And this name could be anything. It's just a representation of that application. So for example, I'll give it as like app and second, sorry, 16th Feb. Okay. Or just give any name, app 1 2 3. Now, this application, when we click on create, there are two usage of this specific register an application portal. I'll come to the second usage later. But right now, if we click on register here, what it gives us an identity which have display name, then it has client ID, application ID or client ID. This is like a username for a user account. So whenever we have to give access to that application, not just an application, let's say we have an external service, or let's say we have an automation code. So for example, we sometimes use scripts which runs automatically in the background. So if those scripts need access to a resource, that script would have either we can provide like a username and password in that script of a user account, or we can create this application, sorry, this service principal, use this client secret and client ID there in that script. So for example, this client ID, or think of it as a username. Then we will have to create a password for this account. Now, that password is known as client secret. So either you can call it app ID, call it client ID or username. Then we have got app secret, or call it as client secret, which acts like a password. Now, here you have three options to authenticate that specific applications. Either you have certificates, which you can upload here. That could be any certificate, maybe from GoDaddy or any other certificate provider. Then you can have your own client secret, or you have got federated credentials. So for example, we take client secrets, we give it any name, for example, secret 123. Now expires is like for user account, we do not have the option to set the expiry of a specific credentials. In this case, we can have it. For example, the application which we are trying to configure, we want that application to use for, let's say, 1 month only. So we can have this much of expiration, like this username and password will be valid only for these many days. So either you can choose out of these, or you can have a custom time period as well. So let's take as like 90 days, then add. Now we have got a username and a password. What is the password? This value here. And guys, remember, whenever you create this, this value here is visible only on the first time when you create it. If I refresh this page, or if I go to a different screen and then come back, this value will be hidden. So we have copied it and pasted it here. Let me go back to another page, come back on this page. Or let me refresh it.
No, I think it's
I'm sorry.
no. I think last time also I have seen this. It was keep on visible, but yeah,
Okay.
now it's
So
created.
like if you refresh the page, or if you come back, like I'm not sure why it was visible when maybe like the refresh did not happen. But now, as you can see, this value is hidden. And if now you want to see it, you will not be able to see it at all. So the only option is you would have to create a new client secret if you want to use for the same service principal. Now, this service principal and this username, so this client ID or client secret, you can either configure with that third-party application in their settings, or the code you have written, in that code you can put this as the username and password. And whatever access this service principal would have on that Azure resource, your application or your automation code will have the same access over that resource. Now, how do we provide the access? Go back to the resource. So let's say, for example, I'm going back to the virtual machine. I go to access control IAM, add, add role assignment. So let's say I want to give it virtual machine administrator login or contributor. Now, here, this time I will not select user group. I will try to find the service principal, which I just created. What was the name of that service principal? Was it test?
App something. It was app something.
App 123?
Yeah.
So now app 123 has got this role, virtual machine contributor, on VM3. Now I want this app123 to be configured in my the like external application or the code. What I will do is I'll just use these credentials, client secret, client ID. This one here, and that application would have the exact same access what I have given to this service principal. Now, if I go to the theoretical part, so what is service principal? A service principal in Azure is a security identity used by applications, services, or automated processes, or maybe automated scripts to access Azure resources. It is essentially an identity that you can assign specific permissions to, allowing non-interactive access. Means you're not doing anything manually, you're not putting the credentials manually into the applications. It will automatically use these client secrets to access the Azure resource. So non-interactive access to resources without relying on a user's credentials like a username and password. Key points to remember is AAD identity. A service principal is special kind of identity in AAD, which is used to represent an application, service, or automation process. Used for automation. So as I mentioned, like you can use in the scripts, permissions and RBAC control. So you can provide permissions to that service principal using the RBAC permissions. Then authentication. To authenticate a service principal, you generally use a client ID and client secret similar to username and password or a certificate. So this is how a service principal used. We will do a short demo for this, but after learning what is Azure Key Vault, I will explain both of them in one demo. So before we move to manage identity, do you have any question on this? Anyone? Don't feel shy.
Can we just go to the service the screen once again?
Sure. Which screen, please?
Yeah, here in the Azure RBAC roles, right? Role assignment.
Mm-hmm.
Click on add role assignment. There are basically three things. One is adding this role to a service principal,
Mm-hmm.
adding this role to an user or a
Mm-hmm.
group,
Mm-hmm.
and there is one thing, manage identity.
There's the
Manage
next
identity.
topic.
Okay, that's the next topic, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and can we just go back to the uh, what was that into the Azure Entra page
Okay.
once. Microsoft, yeah. So here we have created this
Okay. Just to give you a review. So we came to this page, then we
uh,
came to app registrations.
yes.
Here, new registration.
Mhm.
Then give it any name of your choice to represent that
Yeah,
that
yeah,
identity.
yeah. Can you just explain about this tenant once? What is this single tenant and multiple tenant?
Yes, that's the second part for
Okay,
this specific thing, like how, like why this registered application is used. So
okay,
this one just to represent an application or the automation code, just to create the client secret and client ID. Now, the second use of this register, this specific topic, this specific option, register an application. So let's say, as I mentioned, you have got that third party or external application, which you have
mm,
just created. You had just designed the code for it. You just designed the GUI, the graphical user interface, or that. You want your users to access that application. Now,
mm.
let's say you put that application over the internet. How would you like your users to access it? Just put the IP address or the URL of that application right away, and any user would be able to access it? Or would you like of the users to authenticate and then be able to access that application? How would you like it to be used? What is the
Uh, to
secured way?
to be authenticated and do it.
Authenticated, right? You would not want that anyone on the internet just put the URL, whosoever has the URL, and may be able to use their application, right?
Right.
So in order to authenticate, what exactly do you need in the backend? You have the interface, you have the code, you have the application which is running perfectly fine for you.
Mm.
But if you have to authenticate, what do you need in the background?
I think we need some permissions. We need some client ID and client secret and the
No, no.
permissions or some other
When
protocol, SAML or ODC.
so all of those things which you just mentioned,
Permission.
where exactly that works? So you have the client secret or you have the username and password. Where exactly that works in the background? Where
If
exactly it is authenticated?
it
It
will
is
come to this application to get it authenticated or Azure Entra to authenticate the
Azure.
user.
Yes, Azure Entra. So in the backend, there should be some IDP system.
Hmm.
When we see IDP system, You have Okta, you have Entra, you have Facebook, you have Twitter, you have
Mm.
Google, right? You have like Apple. So in the back end, there must be some kind of source where the user accounts or the secrets are created. So when your users would enter those credentials, only then they would be able to access their application, right? This is a secured way, right? Yes or no?
That's correct.
Right? Now, this registered application, your application, where exactly that request would go. So for example, you have created that page when user would enter their username and password, but in the backend, where exactly that request would go for authentication. So this way you can define that, okay, when user will be entering their credentials, so that request should come to Entra, or that request should go to Twitter, or should go to Facebook or Okta, or maybe any other IDP system. Then you have to configure your application, the code in the background, you'll have to configure that way. So when you register an application here, now again come back to this part. Let's say we have this application with the say Ajay app.
Mhm.
Okay, this is the name of your application.
Right.
Now you are thinking the second way. Now you're not thinking about this client secret, or the client ID. You are thinking that my application, all the requests for authentication should come to Entra. You are thinking in that way now. So you
Right.
enter the name of this application. Now here we have some options. Who can use this application or access this API? Who can access this application? Now you're defining accounts in this organizational directory only. Means this tenant where this directory which we have all the users in this directory, they should have access to this application. Or accounts in any organization directory, means you remember we can have multiple tenants in same tenant, or multiple directory in the same tenant. I showed you in the first or second classes. We can manage
Mhm.
tenants, right? So if you want all of the users from this Azure tenant or in your organization, then you can choose this option, multi-tenant. Then third option is accounts in any organization directory, any Microsoft Entra ID tenant, and personal Microsoft accounts. So any user who is hosted on in the any organization which are managed in the Azure. So I'm not talking about Twitter, Facebook. I'm only talking about Azure, but any organization in the world. Then the fourth one is personal Microsoft accounts only. Those accounts which you have registered as Microsoft account. It could be your Hotmail, it could be your live account, or it could be your Gmail or any other account which is registered as a Microsoft account. So these are these options which can log into their application, which are configured with your Azure. So
Can
let's
you
say,
just explain me about the multi-tenant one? Why we are creating multiple tenants? Is it for the billing purpose only?
no, billing, not billing purpose. It's like the two different environment within the same organization. Who was asking this question?
This Ajay.
Ajay. So Ajay, if you just go through my first or second video, we had talked about like multiple tenants.
Okay.
Let me see if I can show it here.
See, Ajay, if you have see, assume that your company is having a testnet environment on a different tenant, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and production on a different tenant, okay.
Okay.
The users across the organization is common, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you need to access. So you are provided an access. Uh, I mean, like to access the testnet as well as production.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In this case, what happens is like you can access in both. Okay. For example, there are few users who are working only on production support, and they are not given any test access.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In that case, what happens? Only production related things they can access. Okay. If you want your application to be accessed in both environments, testnet and production, you need to use the second one. Correct me if I'm wrong, Siddharth.
Yes, yes, absolutely right. So Ajay, look at the screen. So I went
Mm-hmm.
here on this screen and I
Mm-hmm.
click on Swiss directory, and you can see we have got two tenants here, or two directories. One is got Varshney, other is got test, which is under the same organization. I did not sign out or sign in. You can see it here. Now, if I click on switch here, I'm logging into the other directory, which should have
Mm-hmm.
different accounts. So as Vikram mentioned, like for example, you have test tenant and one is like production environment. So these both of these are completely separate, but would be registered in the same organization.
Mhm. Okay, so the
So in
other
that
ten
case, you can choose the second option.
so other tenant is basically used for testing
No,
purpose.
no, it's just an example.
Mhm.
It's not like you are want the testing only, then you will create a different tenant.
It
You
could be
have,
anything.
it could be anything. It depends upon the organization need. You don't want to like merge. For example, let's say you have two separate companies, but you don't have separate tenants or separate organization created in Azure for both the companies, but you want to manage those companies separately in separate directories. So the policies you create, or let's say the licenses you purchase, everything could be managed separately if you have two different tenants, but the
Mhm.
organization would be one.
Okay, got it.
Vikram, in the meanwhile, I'm logging in. Anything else you want to add on this?
Yeah, nothing, nothing.
Not sure why it's not showing. I might have to troubleshoot, but you
No,
got the
no,
idea, Jay, right?
I
Hmm.
got the idea. Thanks, man. Thanks for
Okay.
that.
So now if I go back to the primary directory, I will again click on switch directory. Then
So for every tenant, we have a tenant ID, right? From where we are getting that ID? From the client connection or anywhere else also we can get it here, right? Tenant ID. Okay,
okay.
got it.
So
Thank you.
that was the second way. Now, when you click like create this app registrations,
Mhm.
now you will have to go to all applications. Then, for example, app 123. Do you see this endpoints option at the top?
Right.
Now, how would you tell the application then any authentication request should go where? So in the code of your application, you will have to define these two URLs or how you want to define it. Like you have different options. Either you can have this, uh, like oh, you want to do it via OAuth, then you can use these endpoints. You want to do through SASML, then you can use these endpoints. So you have different kind of endpoints or OpenID Connect, how you want to authorize. So these kind of endpoints you can use. If you want to do it through graph. Someone was asking about what is graph. So I explained that graph is an endpoint which you can connect to use like to connect to Azure. So you can use this endpoint as well. So it depends how your application is created, and accordingly you can mention these URLs or these endpoints in that application. And when a user would try to log in, that request would go to Azure depending upon these endpoints here. Endpoint is nothing, is like a connection where your connection would like your application would try to make that connection to. So whatever URL you mentioned there, that request will go to that connection, that endpoint. So from here you copy and paste it there and register the application here, and your user should be able to authenticate here.
Understood.
Any question on this?
No, no, I'm good.
One more option was there which I left. So if I go back to registration part, this redirect URI. So please read this. We will return the authentication response to this URI, which URI, which you will mention here, after successfully authenticating the user. That means user goes to the URL of that application. He gets the username and password prompt. He enters the credentials. That backend request comes to Entra. Entra authenticates. Okay, this user is good to go. When it authenticates, then the response which will send to that application that we have authenticated this user, it will go to which URI. So you will have to put the URL of that application here, which would receive the prompt. Providing this now is optional and it can be changed later, but a value is required for most authentication scenarios. So that authentication prompt that, okay, this user is okay to go, that will be sent back to their application, which is hosted at this URL. Okay. Similarly, if you have to configure it for like maybe Facebook, Twitter, or any other IDP platform, you'll have to configure same settings in that platform as well. Any question before we move to manage identity?
No, understood.
Okay.
And here there is one thing, if you go back to appreciation page, yes, here if you can select our application, there is one option.
Enterprise application?
Yes, no, appreciation only.
Mhm.
Enterprise application is for SAML, right? Go to all applications and click on our
Mhm.
application.
Mhm.
App, select our application 123, which we have created.
Mhm.
App 123. Here there is an option manage application in the last option, application ID URL next to that redirect